I'm Ken Parker. I'm the chair of the AQR and delighted to welcome you to the Hub, which is the second in the series of webinars that is brought to you from the AQR. Today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Nick Southgate, who is a philosopher turned advertising planner. He's worked at some of the greatest agencies, Gray, DFGW, Cogent Elliott, Ogilvy and Mather, just to say a few. Nowadays he trains people how to use behavioural economics, but also teaches people how to be cool at the School of Life, which is a very interesting one, Nick, but we'll talk about that a little bit later, I'm sure. Today he's going to be talking about the qualitative instinct, insights from the behavioural sciences. I'm sure you're going to find this absolutely fascinating because it's going to tell us how great qualitative researchers really are. So I'm going to pass you over to Nick. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here for this webinar for the AQR. And you asked me to do this a while back, and I'm always happy to do stuff for the AQR because I am someone who's I'm very pro-research in general and very pro-qualitative research specifically. And anything I work on, really, I don't feel entirely in control of it or entirely connected to what I'm trying to do until I've been to a group, to be honest, right? So until I've seen the whites of their eyes. And that's what I want to explore why it is. I don't think that's just a sentimentality on my part or something curious about me. There is something about seeing people talk about something face to face that gives you an insight into what people really think that cannot be replaced by any other mode of research or any other way of doing things. And despite the sort of constant attrition against quality research, that remains the case, right? So that's really what this this webinar is about. So, and I should say, last time I saw Ken was at a WARC conference, and there we were discussing, indeed, we were having one of those interminable, the death of qual debates. And we're saying there really, I say it's one of those things that these debates come up time and time again at conferences, and maybe it's just conference chairs being lazy and saying, I know, we've got a spare half hour, we can fill it with the death of qual debate. But certainly the death of qual has been greatly exaggerated, hence the picture of Mark Twain. This is one of the weakest jokes in the presentation, I apologise for it. But as Ken will tell you, the AQR will tell you, qual is in fact in rude health and never doing better. But it's interesting to think why it is that people are sort of constantly worried, or why it is that the qualitative community is prone to this kind of self-flagellation. Chris Forrest gave a very good presentation at the MRS about this 7 or 8 years ago, which is very memorable. Because you certainly don't have debates sort of the death of quant, right? I've never seen that session scheduled anywhere. And I don't catch people who work in sort of neuromarketing saying, oh, we better get together and have the death of neuromarketing debate or things like that. It seems to be something sort of unique to qual. So I think there are some reasons why those suspicions come up. So what's the problem? So the first of them is, I think at some level there is a suspicion, not just amongst clients but amongst ourselves, that just talking to people isn't enough. It's failing to be clever enough, and that's because I think we have we lose confidence that somehow there is a smart way of talking to people or a smart way of finding out about people without even talking to them. So we start to run down that basic tool. And I want to talk about a few reasons this afternoon about why, in fact, talking to people is our primary way of discovering what they think and do, far from being the weakest or one that's a long way down the list, and it will always be essential to the mix. The second one is the old chestnut that people's answers aren't reliable, or they're post-rationalized, or they're as soon as they start thinking about them, they're really just creating kind of convenient fictions rather than telling anything that's true. But even if that, and of course that is sometimes the case, but I think the fascinating thing is exactly how they go through that process. I'm always intrigued to know as much how people talk about things as how, as much how people don't talk about things, or how they avoid talking about things, or the answers they use so that they don't answer you directly. Those are as fascinating to me as supposedly the truth underneath. And indeed, if you want to really understand how to change someone's behavior, all of that surround sound, all that stuff they go through, is as essential as the supposedly direct central answer. The other thing that people worry about is introspection. So that when people, if you ask people, say, what do you feel about something, that their introspection is inherently unreliable or even fictitious. I mean, certainly my philosophical background says there are philosophers who will seriously maintain at some length that introspection is genuinely impossible. It's, our experience of looking into ourselves is in fact a sort of a delusion of kinds. These are quite extreme people and quite unhappy people in real life. But certainly at the very end I'll talk about David Hume, who was a philosopher who he believed in the possibility of introspection, but he was very troubled by it because he said, I look at myself and I discover very little. But the whole point, I think, of understanding how introspection works is to understand how it's a very fragile tool, but if we guide how it's used and we understand how it works, we can, as ever, make good use of it. And then finally, the final point in this chart to say, I think we live in an age where numbers and science tend to trump softer, more personal approaches. And it always surprises me how much research seems to have underneath the belief that if you could just cut out the person you were talking to and talk directly to their brain or a set of attitudes and belief divorced from that person, you would discover more. But it's very much always been my belief and my assertion that research should be conducted at human level. It's understanding people as people and dealing with them person to person is the interesting thing, because that's where they live most of their life. And getting underneath is really should always be and will always be a secondary concern. So now my point of attack for this is going to be one that might seem contrary to some people. So I've been associated for the last 5 or 6 years with the growth and use of behavioural economics and the behavioural sciences in advertising, marketing and research. And a lot of people have, as they like to do, taken behavioural economics to once more be proof that the death of qual is nearby, right? So it's just around the corner. And I think actually, absolutely to the contrary, the behavioural sciences show exactly why qualitative research has never been more relevant. So I'll talk you through how I think that works. So this chart here is showing, it's one way of cashing out the sort of core insight at the heart of the behavioural sciences. So this is what some people call System 1 versus System 2, what Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel laureate, will call fast and slow thinking. So this is the idea that most of people's thinking and most of their decisions and most of their behaviour is governed by System 1 thinking. So System 1 is implicit, we have no control over it, it's almost effortless. It jumps from fact to fact or argument to argument by association rather than by logic. It's incredibly fast. It is by and large unconscious, although we should be very uncomfortable about the word unconscious at all times, about what we mean by it. It's intuitive and it's emotional. And again, emotional is a very unhelpful word here maybe, but it means it's accompanied more by feeling than it is by articulated and well-structured thought. Now, I think we can all concede that that is where we live most of our lives. We don't go through the day trying to think hard about it. We go through the day trying not to think about it, or succeeding in not thinking about it. And it is System 1 that guides us through. And in contrast to System 2, or what Kahneman calls slow thinking. So this is where it's explicit, you're in control of it, it takes genuine mental effort to achieve, you're deducing things in a logical fashion, moving from one clause of an argument to another, you're very aware of doing it, and you're following rules, and it's a cognitive process. And the key thing about this is it's incredibly slow in mental terms. So the claim here is it moves at 50 bits per second, right? And if you lived your whole life at 50 bits per second, then you will get run over. You would fall down the stairs, you would drop every ball that was thrown to you to catch and so on. You can't exist at that speed. So understandably, we spend very little time there. Now, the claim of those who would champion this as a sort of the death of qualitative research is that because most of our decision making is done at that unconscious level, we can only get to it by using research methods which do not trigger System 2. And perforce, they say, qualitative research, where you ask people direct questions and ask them to think very hard about it, works by triggering System 2. So it is doomed to failure. Now, what this ignores, I think it ignores the two important things. One is that that we are, as researchers, when we are sat there, we are, of course, ourselves clued into System 1. Everyone is clued into System most of the time. And we are all very adept at reading each other very fast without having to think about it. And I think the skill of a qual researcher is to understand how to read people, understand your own ability to read it and report on it, and that's what you get very good at doing. So system two is kind of not actually how we're doing that. Plus, it's important to remember when people are looking at quant research. I'm very struck by this. Looking at quant research and decoding it is an incredibly system two process. Clients have, in my experience, almost no instinct about quantitative research. They need to be told what it means. And I'm always very intrigued that to debrief it, you have to turn it into a series of norms. So, because they don't say, oh, is 76% a good number? They just want to know, is that higher or lower than anyone else? Which is to say, it translates a system 2 number into a system 1 response. I know being higher than the other people is good, and you don't need to think about it. So the whole point is we want to spend out, just as clients and researchers and others, we want to spend our life in system 1. And of course, human beings want to spend our life there. So we do have incredibly good skills for decoding the world using only system 1 instincts. I'll give you a few examples of how that works. So the first of these, this is an example I owe to Mark Earls, who I know was scheduled to do this, and sadly can't be here today. But Mark tells the story. He's done a lot of work with Alex Bentley, who is formerly of the Tipping Point Project at Durham University, now at Bristol University, and the co-author of Mark's last book. Mark was telling me this anecdote about people did some sentiment analysis using Twitter. So going through all of the Twitter comments, they concluded that people get up slightly later on the weekend than they do in the week. Now, if this comes as you as no surprise, that's because you are profoundly human, and your observation of the world, without really thinking about it at all, has confirmed to you that by and large people get up a little bit later at the weekend than they do in the week. So our ability to observe what other people do and generalize from the few data points we have, the experience we have, to a general rule is incredibly powerful and can beat, the analysis of a billion Twitter statements. And this strikes me as a constant frustration of stuff I see derived from big data, is it tends to just prove things which are common sense. And rather than that being, and that to me reinforces our ability, that we have this incredibly powerful evolved ability that System 1 is about, where we can observe a small number of people doing something and leap to the conclusion, by and large extremely accurately, that that is a general truth and something we should pay attention to. So that's it's obvious our ability, our observational ability, and that's what's great about groups, is you can get those crucial, we tend to call them nuggets, but those moments which, although we've only seen 1 or 2 of them, we know, we have that instinct, we can detect they represent general truths, and we don't need to go on to prove an extraordinary data level that they are general truths. And another study which worked on this principle, this I learned from Professor Peter Ayton. I did some seminars with about this, and he's a very, very skilled and experienced behavioural psychologist. And he's very interested, as anyone who teaches in a university is, in how people score your classes, because they get assessed endlessly these days, and you have to worry about what your score will be. And he was talking about a study where people are shown an incredibly short clip of a lecturer presenting. In this case, in the study that's kicked off this area of work, it's a 30-second clip. I understand that people have done it with clips as short as a few seconds. And those people are asked to predict how much people will enjoy those lectures, how regularly people will attend, how good the lectures will be. And it turns out that those predictions, based on a few seconds exposure to a lecturer, statistically significantly correlate with the actual scores given by people who've attended a whole semester's worth of classes. So it's that thing where, and it's this thing where we are very good at first impressions, and first impressions do count. So in the old phrases, I took an instant dislike to him to save time, right? But this feeling that we don't like somebody, or that we feel we understand somebody in a few moments, is something we are incredibly good at. And and it means that we can, what's interesting about this study is it shows that going from a specific moment to a generalizable rule is in fact something we are incredibly good at. And I think that that ability to read people is something that the behavioural sciences absolutely prove we can do. And there are many studies where people are exposed to a tiny amount of information about other people and can very accurately predict what they do. I mean, people who have read Malcolm Gladwell's Blink will be very aware of the possible failures in this, but by and large the point is it's accurate most of the time. And it's funny, when I was researching, I was looking on Google Images for a picture of a lecturer. I don't know about you, I look at this guy and I think that's a 6.5 out of 10 for the term. He knows what he's talking about, but a little bit dull. Going through other things, I could think, yeah, it's just these instincts form in your head. You look at a picture, you just think, waffling dull platitudes from a business school, another pointless presentation. And that, I think learning to understand that's what you're doing and how useful and accurate that can be is part of the skill of becoming a great qual researcher. Now, the other thing I want to say is that we can spot when people fail to or shift between system 1 and system 2. So there's lots of very interesting research methodologies out there which look at implicit testing, which are meant to test people's system 1, their fast thinking, without having to actually ask them about it. But I want to give you a little sort of thought experiment here. So hopefully you'll recognize this situation. So you're at home and you say to someone out in your home, your nearest and dearest, you say, "My darling, have you seen my keys?" And they go, "No." And you boil with rage because the split-second nature of that answer completely communicates to you that they didn't think about it. It's just too fast. Right? I think we're very attuned to spotting when people have and haven't thought about it. And the trick that surely anyone knows is either to think about that question or, so someone says, "Have you seen my keys?" "No, I haven't seen them." If you fake enough silence, just the right amount of silence, you imply that you've actually thought about it properly and people are happy with your answer. Now, it's curious that because our system 1 says question, bounce it off with an answer that gets rid of the question, because most of the time in questioning we're not really answering it, we're just trying to get rid of the question. We can spot when people are doing that. We are very attuned to spotting when people are doing that. And it's why when we're complaining in a shop and we know someone's just giving us pat answers, they're staying in that very automatic world where they're saying what they think goes next rather than actually engaging with us. And it's hugely frustrating. But my point here is that we are absolutely brilliant at spotting it. Now, I think the interesting drive for this would be that qual research is incredibly good at spotting these instant, shallow, and unthought responses. But I think what's interesting is that over the years we've come to believe, or we have this heritage in qual research, that it's all about the depth of the response. And obviously this is, if you go back far enough, so Ernst Dichter, as a disciple of Freud, invents the focus group or the discussion group, and there's that kind of laying on of hands to Bill Schlachman and people like that, and it's all meant to come out of, and certainly those studies in the 40s and 50s were Freudian in nature. They did have the idea that they were discovering profound and deep motivations that would explain why people did things. And we carry this kind of depth prejudice into our language. But what I want to argue for, in the contrary, is that focus groups or qual research is brilliant at studying the shallows. It's brilliant at spotting all the stuff where people don't really think about it much at all, and turning that into really useful data. So I think and partly it's just a question of language, and partly it's a question of structure. But if we understand how we think and how we think about other people and how they think, we can start mapping what I would call mapping the shallows. And I'm not the only person to be saying this. So Wendy Gordon's paper in the International Journal of Market Research 3 or 4 years ago, which talked about the implications of behavioural economics for qual research. There's sort of a key phrase in that I would take to be the end of asking why. So definitely asking the question to someone, why did you do this, does trigger system 2. People start thinking and they start giving you the answers they think they ought to give you and so on. But and that stuff leaves a lot more effort to decode and interpret. But what we can ask all the other questions. So these are the things which I always thought were pretty interesting and useful to do in any research. Anyway, so if you don't plumb the depths, to map the shallows, you can do these 5 things. So one is you can recall people's first answers. I've always thought there always is that presumption that a focus group should be, as medical doctors say, a mid-flow sample. So you need to get people going because the first bit was inherently useless. But I was always fascinated by those early answers that people just gave you off the top of their heads. Because in that was really how they avoided really engaging with something. And that's the thing I had to overcome through communications. Understanding that kind of outer layer was incredibly important. And it was always slightly disappointing that that was sometimes kind of played down in the whole methodology. Another thing is to give priority to the things that people don't think about. So, and I'll come on to an answer about this here, but it's always struck me as interesting. So having a discussion, it's very odd, certain things never come up or they never seem to get considered. And if people were being logical about it by hypothesis, those things should come up. And we can spot those absences. So obviously you have to be careful if certain things are absent because people's genuinely not interested. But if there's good reason to believe they should have been there, then we should be looking for those. And the next thing is to understand the influences on people's automatic responses. So that is to say, the extent to which when people give you an answer that's very swift, whether what they're borrowing to do that. So this is my sort of key learning about behavioural economics, is that if you ask people for an answer, it's far too hard to work their own answer out, so they borrow someone else's. And by putting stimulus in the room, you can see whether people like to borrow from that or not. The ability with which you can establish borrowings for people, answers that they would like to give, is sort of one of the key things communications can achieve. So in communications research, I was very interested in how quickly people would adopt someone else's answer as their own answer. So far from this being a failure to discover the deep truth of their feelings, it was a very useful finding of how willingly they were to take on a way of discussing something. And the way to do that, the replacement for the why question, is to ask when people do something, where they do it, who they do it with, and how they do it, which by and large don't require a great deal of reflection on people's part. They're things they can answer reliably and quite automatically. And the final thing there is to separate what I've called here separating intuitions from comprehension. So I was always struck the extent to which qual research was obsessed with seeing whether people had understood what you'd said to them. And obviously people can, by and large, they can parrot back the words you've just given them. And we tend to take that as a sign of comprehension. What I was far more interested in measuring was the extent to which they could absorb it into their own words and that they could intuit or start to work with the shape of the argument underneath the words, as it were. And that's what I would call an intuition. So something became instinctive for people to talk about. That was far more interesting to whether they could actually claim or demonstrate they could understand it. And again, that's something our system one, our own instincts, are very good at spotting when someone really understands something and when they're just telling you they understand it. Now, so to sort of move towards wrapping this up, I was going to talk about some research I did myself many years ago now for Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. And this was some research amongst people who didn't pay any tax, or they did a certain amount of casual work, earning £50 to £100 a week, which means over a year they would have £2,000, £3,000, £4,000 of undeclared income, which is an amount that Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs care about profoundly. And you might ask, where do you find these people? And funnily enough, they tend to be market research recruiters, or so they are the builders that market research recruiters strangely seem to be always married to. But there was no difficulty in finding enough people to fill these groups, and the mere promise of being paid in cash was music to their ears. So we got them all together. Now it was a communications campaign, and we had a whole series of lines we wanted to use to see if they would make people believe that they were in jeopardy when they avoided paying tax. Now, what was interesting is you could show someone a line, it would say something like, "It's not fair if we don't all pay our tax." And in a moment, they would have a rebuttal to that. As a group, they would find a rebuttal. Because if you don't pay your tax, you tend to have a series of embedded beliefs. So you believe nobody pays their tax. You believe that you don't avoid enough tax for it to be important. You believe that they never get around to catching up with you. So you have these quite robust set of interlocking beliefs, which mean that you're doing the right thing. They justify your world, and you move very slickly between them. So we show a series of lines, and because that body of belief was very robust, people would bounce the line straight back. So you'd say, "Oh, we're looking at your records even now," and they go, "No, you're not." Now, the real test of the effectiveness of a line turned out to be the time it took people to rebut it. So the line that really worked was one that said, "Somebody somewhere kept a record on what you were paid." And they realized this was out of their control, it was probably true, and that somewhere out there was the thing that would be their undoing. And there was a noticeable and distinctive pause on the tape. And in the end, I debriefed it by timing the different lengths of gap on the tape to say this one where they're silent for almost 2 seconds, they're terrified. And indeed, in the room, you could see the cogs spinning behind as they tried to rebut this answer. Now, of course, they did, because they rebutted everything. But the point of the debrief was, if you just taken it at a surface level, or at face value, you'd say they said every single one of these things wasn't true and they didn't believe it, and you regarded the campaign as failing. But if you took at the level, that very way, your ability to read people, you could spot in those brief moments the genuine panic and the genuine sense of sort of cognitive fear this line put into people's hearts, and that was the winner. That's something where you could build a campaign that would unsettle people and you could do other things on. And that's something absolutely was entirely achievable in a good old-fashioned qual group, just by being smarter about how you listened and smarter about how you reported the answer. And I'm intrigued those groups were done best part of 10 years ago. This is a very recent campaign from Motorcycles, Revenue and Customs I had nothing to do with. And it picks up on a quite known sort of behavioural economics trope, which is to increase honesty, you have to make people feel observed. So by having eyes on something, people become more honest around it. But this seems to me absolutely to build on that insight that if you make people feel that they are being watched and that record is out there, they will do something. This ran as, it's an animation, the full version, which ran on cash points, which is brilliantly targeted for people who live in a cash economy. So as you're stood there taking, as I often was at this time, thousands of pounds out to pay your builder, it's a very good reminder that what you're doing may not be entirely legitimate. So just to close this out, I just wanted to, at the very beginning I promised I'd talk about David Hume. David Hume is one of the heroes of the Scottish Enlightenment and one of the finest British philosophers ever to live. And Hume had this dictum where he said, there we are, let's get to pop up the great dictum, said, reason is and ought only to be a slave to the passions. So by the passions, he really means what we would call system one thinking, that flow of our emotions, the feelings that guide us through the day. He says, that's how we live life. And if we try to intrude on it with reason, we can only do that occasionally and fractionally. And the idea that reason should rule the passions is entirely wrong. Now, what I find intriguing about this, there's two things intriguing. Hume got to this in the Treatise of Human Nature by looking within himself, by the introspective effort, reflective effort of trying to discover how reason would work. And the advantage of this was he created one of the greatest works of philosophy of any time. The disadvantage was it meant he had a nervous breakdown at the age of 24. He proved to himself the life of reason was impossible. But what he also proved to himself is that we can, by using our own minds as a laboratory, we can learn to understand, we can learn to feel how we feel about things and to report those things better. And I've always, I suppose maybe it's my philosophical background, I believe that we can learn to report our own feelings and understand and thoughts and learn by doing that how other people think and feel. And I think it's by becoming a very sensitive reader of other people that we succeed in qualitative research. And I think it's that instinct, that evolved and powerful instinct to be able to read other people, which is something that only qual can ever give you. And even when people do really good quant research, it's insightful, revealing, we still have to turn it into something which we feel like that way about. So qual research's triumph for me is that it exists entirely at that human level where we read other people and understand other people and be able to map and analyze and produce insight about that. So that is my last thought. I don't know if do we have a way of, Ken can nod me here, do we have a way of fielding questions as we go, or do they all come afterwards? Yeah, so I'll fill the air in a classic radio fashion. Well, we're just going to see if some questions have come in and we answer them on the hoof, if we've got that bit turned on. So, there we are. Yeah, so yeah. So while so it's true to say, when's the next one of these taken?
Questions up, Matt.
Oh, in there. Right.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah. So we are. Okay. So a bit of sound cutting out for blocks. Sorry about the sound issues. I can certainly apologise for that. So it's an interesting question here. So how does what you're saying relate to theories of emotional intelligence? So, okay, that's, so I must admit though, so the phrase emotional intelligence came into play when someone published a book of that name. And this is really the idea that we should take people's ability to respond to situations as being as important as their ability to articulate them and take them apart. And this is, I suppose, as we moved into a world where we were doing more white-collar work in more social situations, the rise of the creative economy, things like that. So there's a relation in the sense that I'm advocating that our ability to respond to other people in that what we might call emotional sphere is very important. I don't know if it relates specifically to those theories because they are a kind of, it's a pop, my understanding would be it's kind of a pop theory of how we should approach the workplace and our own lives and relationships and so on. But so it's a kind of a side issue. But I say that the general point that understanding how we feel is more important than just looking at how other people feel is a big part of it. So, so yes, the slides will be distributed. This will be the case to answer that question. I'll do that as we go through. Now, isn't it a very interesting question from Joanna? Oh, I can never pronounce Joanna's surname. That means she knows exactly who. Joanna Korinskis? You must.
I can't pronounce it.
Years and years ago, not being able to understand that. But Joanna's question was to ask whether you can use your System 1 operations online. So now this I think is very interesting. So there's a classic economist test, the split dollar test, where you have two players and player one proposes a split in a quantity of money and player two's job is just to accept that split, in which case each side gets their side of the division, or they can reject it, in which case both sides get nothing. Now, most people just offer a 50-50 split, and most people are happy to accept a 50-50 split. But it does happen that people offer what may be called inequitable splits, so 60-40, 70-30, 80-20. If you're playing the game face-to-face, people find it hard to offer an inequitable split. If you take, in older studies, they do it on the phone, people start to find it easier to offer an unfair split and easier to accept it. In more modern studies, which are conducted by email or online, people find it even easier. And it seems that not having someone physically present changes, obviously, as we know, your response to them, and it changes the way that you will make decisions about them. So, and that seems to be because the personal bond that we feel when someone's in front of us seems to be some way removed down, so it becomes easier to behave unfairly to them. We lose that social constraint. So it does mean that we should be very cautious about how we lead online things, because the extent to which we lose vast amount of cues when someone isn't in front of us, well, it seems too obvious to mention maybe, but we can't read their body language, we can't read how they're sitting and moving, and we're taking all these things in all the time, and we move very much to the System 2 world of reading the words and assuming that they are what they mean. So it might be possible, but by and large I think my advocacy is definitely for the whites of the eyes approach to research. So I suppose that does leave online qual as a sort of a bit of an in-between place, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have its role in wider methodologies. So, Darren T is asking what are the best recent books to read up on this. If there is one book to read about behavioral economics and behavioral science, it's without a doubt Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. It summarizes a lifetime's work in this area, and what I think is fantastic about the book, I mean it's about 400 pages long, so it's not the shortest of books, is he doesn't pull his punches intellectually. He takes you into the nuances of his theory, but it's utterly reasonable, and he will convince you that our ability to, our desire basically to go through the world not thinking about it too hard explains and drives everything we do. It's powerfully convincing in that way. So just reading a few more questions coming in. Oh, that's naughty. Okay, there's quite a few questions coming in about the nature of online qual. And I suppose I was discussing with someone the other day, there's an interesting possibility of, and it's hard to know whether it remains a qual methodology or not. So if you did an online interview with where someone was on Skype or with a webcam, and you're using the software which can analyze their facial expression, you're both getting a response to your reaction to it, you get that, and you get a kind of a mechanical analyzed quant reaction to their emotions moving through. So I've seen some very impressive demonstrations of how that facial coding software works, so it can be done in real time. So I think it's as with a lot of qual methodologies, those you want to measure your own response in as much as you have one against a recorded response, and to challenge the two one against the other. I was always struck that Roddy Glenn's best practice paper on how to deal with a group was that you should listen back to the tape, and then you should read the transcript separately, and then you should listen back to the tape with the transcript, which well, partly depicts a world where there's a lot more time than there ever seems to be, but it's very true. So you remember, you have your reactions, you remember your reactions, you then test them against the words, which is a very different world, and then you test them together. And I think in that kind of belief, or in that kind of practice, there will be a solution to how online qual can make the best of this. So I think I could tell by the number of attendees starting to drop out that we've overrun our time. So thank you everyone for their excellent questions, and thank you for listening. Shall I hand back to Ken to sign us off? Thank you.
Thanks very much, but all I've got to say is thank you very much for attending, everybody. We are going to continue this series of talks, and if any of you out there think you've got a subject that you would like to present to the rest of the AQR, please get in touch, let me know what it is, and maybe we can get it into the series that we've got lined up. I guess I'd just like to finish by saying thank you very much to Nick. That was brilliant, Nick, and it was great fun just listening to you. But the trouble is, I understand some of you out there didn't manage to listen to us at all. So we will be trying to get a recording of this onto the AQR website. So if you have missed anything, then hopefully you can catch up. And thanks once again, Nick. Fantastic. Bye-bye now.